Welcome to Women Ending War, the podcast where Palestinian and Israeli women talk about partnerships for peace, real solutions, and ideas for crafting a new world.
It's where we express our pain, anger, dreams, creativity, and vision, where hope is a conscious choice.
معاكم أميرة مسلم.
I'm Ilana Stockman. Thanks for joining us. Hello, Peta.
Hi, Ilana.
So nice to see you.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. We're here today with Peta Pellach, a longtime interfaith activist and Orthodox Jewish feminist from Sydney, Australia, originally, living here now for 16 years.
That's right.
Yeah. Nice to see you. You wear a lot of hats, Peta, no pun intended.
No, literally and figuratively.
Literally,
Yes.
that's right. You are the director of education for the Elijah Interfaith Institute.
That's right.
And you run something really interesting called the Board of World Religious Leaders.
That's part of Elijah's work.
That's
Yes,
part of Elijah's work. Yes, so that's one hat. And you're also involved with a rainbow group,
Correct.
which is also for interfaith dialogue. This one's just Jewish and Christian.
Jewish Christian.
And you're very involved with Women Wage Peace, especially the Jerusalem branch. We want to hear all about that.
Sure.
And most recently, you belong to the new group Women Champion Change, and also the group from AllMep of women, the Women's Leadership Network. Lots of amazing, beautiful work.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm very blessed to have these opportunities.
Mhm. And we're blessed to have you here today to hear all about it.
Thank
you for being here. So, first of all, how are you today?
Today, we are still not over the war, are we? So we still live with a little bit of a cloud over our heads, even though it's nowhere near as bad as it was a few months ago. I'm encouraged. I think that we can move in the right direction, but I have said to many people over this past 2 years that some of the internal struggles we're having in this country are more threatening in the long term than the external wars. So those concerns haven't left me.
Like what?
Oh, it's no secret that I am very horrified by the thought of the so-called judicial reform, which I see as a judicial overhaul. The news of the closing of Galei Tzahal, even though it's not my radio station at all, I'm just concerned about governments that close media and think that's a priority.
Yep.
I'm extremely concerned about the failure of this government to have proper representation of women's views, even though there are women there. And I think that the feminist perspective is lacking from the women representatives in the government.
Yeah.
I could go on and on. There's a terrible list of things that worry me about the direction this country is taking.
And what do you think? Okay. And what about what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank?
Yes, look, war is an awful thing. And as you said in your introduction, I'm active in Women Wage Peace, and peace activism is a deep part of my life. I do believe that the Palestinian people need to have a way to have dignity, autonomy, justice, all the things that we want for every human being and believe are human rights. And again, as a religious Jewish person, I recognize that our religion gives us more obligations than rights, but it doesn't mean that I don't understand or respect the need for these privileges, these rights. These rights are not privileges. These rights are something that every person has. So I do believe very firmly that we need to have a solution, and a solution doesn't come through war. War is not a solution. War will never be a solution. So, of course, I'm deeply concerned about the situation in Gaza, as I was before October 7th, 2023, and continue to be.
Yeah. You were active in Women Wage Peace before, yes?
Absolutely. On October the 4th, 2023, Women Wage Peace had a huge, wonderful gathering where we brought together Women of the Sun, our Palestinian partner organisation, and thousands of Women Wage Peace members, as well as international supporters from Ireland, from America, from Belgium. It was a wonderful gathering, and I was part of the committee for that gathering to get international supporters to come and join us. So the first thing I did was ask my sisters from Australia to join, which they did. And I will take the opportunity to say that at that gathering, Vivian Silva, our founder and great hero of both feminist and peace work in Israel. Vivian came up to me and put her arms around me and said, "Job well done," even though she'd done most of the work. I'd done very little. I just was on the committee doing my little bit. But Vivian, whom we tragically lost on October the 7th, on October the 4th, gave me a hug, and I'll never forget that.
Wow. So how did the war affect you? Like,
Yes, well, like everybody else, I was shocked. We were all traumatized. We didn't imagine that it would happen or anything as violent as that. I remember that when my husband said on that day, because as observant Jews, we didn't listen to the radio or the television during the day, but when we came back from the synagogue, he said he'd heard that 80 people had been killed. And I said, "Oh, couldn't be." That was my first response. But then, of course, when the festival ended that night and we were listening to the news and hearing the horrors and following for the next 2 days, I discovered that one of my father's cousins had been killed on that day. Of course, that's dreadful that when somebody but of course, everybody in this whole country knows somebody. And that's part of the trauma that we're all going through. So initially, I was in shock and I wasn't interested in calling out for peace. It just didn't seem right. It almost felt like a betrayal of the country to call out for peace at that time. And it wasn't until later in December that I resumed the peace activism. Meanwhile, throughout October and November, I joined my sisters in Women Wage Peace to stand with the families of the hostages. The fact that initially we believed Vivian Silva was a hostage motivated us, of course, to be there as a movement, but we soon realised that mother to mother, family to family, we needed to be there, and that was the focus of our work. And then in December, I was at a meeting of the Rainbow Group for Jewish-Christian Dialogue, and every year, we choose a theme for our monthly meetings, and our theme we had chosen was justice. Based on the threat to the judicial system in Israel, we thought we should talk about justice from Christian and Jewish perspectives. And Leah Shakdiel, one of the great feminist heroes of this country, was speaking at the meeting, and she just threw away the line, "Revenge is not justice." And it pierced me, that sentence, because I wondered whether my failure to call out for peace in those previous weeks had really been because I was wanting revenge deep inside myself. And it was, for me, a turning point. I said, no, I have to resume peace activism. I believe in peace. I don't believe this war is going anywhere. And of course, as you know, what's happened is more and more people came over the period of the nearly 2 years of activism, came over to the realization that war was not bringing home the hostages. War was not bringing any sort of solution. Every bomb dropped brought more support for Hamas. That's the reality. War will never solve our problems. And
plus so much needless death.
Absolutely tragic.
We heard hostage families saying, I don't want somebody else to have to lose a child in the name of saving my child. What's the point of that?
Absolutely. Every death is a universe, as both Islam and Judaism says. And of course, yes, it's been absolutely horrific. One of the things that's interesting to me as a person who watches foreign media as well, I was often amazed at Israelis who were denying the damage that was being done in Gaza. And many of them genuinely didn't believe it.
Yeah.
And that's
there's a lot of
tragic.
that. Yeah, it is tragic. We're taught that. I feel like we're, in my Orthodox Jewish day school upbringing, we were very actively and aggressively taught to distrust anything that a Palestinian said. And I hear this all the time, people reacting to news about what's going on in Gaza by saying, they're all lying.
Yes.
They're all lying.
Yes.
Like, 22,000 children and babies. I was like, no, it's all lies. Like, well, there are lots of videos and there are lots of pictures and lots of testimonies from doctors and volunteers from around the world. There are reports, UN groups, the World Health Organization, zillions of groups saying the same thing. No, they're all making up. They're all just anti-Semites.
But the problem is I do remember one doctored video where they said this mother had lost all her children, and then they showed that it was the same picture used several years earlier in Lebanon. And unfortunately, it feeds into this distrust
Yes.
of media. I'm also go through a phase where one of my biggest concerns about this country at the moment is the failure to hold truth as a value. We see it in politics all the time. People will just say what they want, and led by, of course, American politics as well. People will say anything, and it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. And I believe, as an observant Jew, that truth is a value. Truth is something we have to pursue. And unfortunately, we live in a world where truth is not upheld by people in authority or valued, even by the vast majority sometimes of the population. Don't even worry whether something's true or not true. So it's
For
sad.
me, so that's definitely, I definitely relate to that. I also, when you're talking about that, I also feel like another value that's missing for me is compassion.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely. And again, if I go back to what's happened during this war, is
Yeah.
that on October the 4th, Women Wage Peace announced its plans for the next 2 years. And of course, when the war broke out, we were frozen for a while. But after a while, we said we have to get back to those plans. And one of them was a project in which I was intimately involved. It was called Building Bridges. And the concept was we had several branches, but the concept of the program I was involved in was to look at religion as a tool for peacemaking rather than as an obstacle for peace. And we brought together Muslim, Jewish, Christian, and Druze women in Israel, and we explored our shared religious values towards peace. And in the meanwhile, in Bet Jala, a group of Palestinian women led by Women of the Sun, although they were all Muslim women, but they explored the same issues of compassion and love for the other, respect for your neighbor, and so on, that religious values that are peace-building values. And during this war, we brought together Israeli women and Palestinian women. 5 times we went to Bet Jala to meet with the women. And there was one day when we walked in, and one of the women in the group told us she just lost 17 members of her family in Gaza that day or the day before. And we hugged her. We were there. And then another day we
these
all
descriptions
went.
are like mind-blowing shock.
Absolutely. But it was...
It's like October 7th. For the Palestinians, it's like every day is October 7th. For the
And the thing was, for the Israeli women to be hearing it and to be there with a woman, it means it's not just on television. You're focused on somebody. It's her family. And we were able to hug her. And then there was another day when we came after no sleep at all. It was one of those nights when there were sirens all night. And the Palestinian women felt our exhaustion and began to see something a little bit more from the Israeli side. And that was enormously important. I can tell you many stories about the idea of us being together, getting to know each other as human beings, and I think particularly as women. And that builds compassion, because when somebody is just a figure on a screen or in a book or theoretically, hypothetically, it's not the same as knowing someone person to person.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that humanizing. That's a lot of what we talk about here on the podcast, that we're really trying to do. Is one of the main reasons we started this podcast was to counter what we've come to know as dehumanization.
Absolutely.
There's so much dehumanization of the other. There are so many like very real aggressive efforts and so we're trying to like put a human face, exactly what you just described. It changes everything.
Changes everything. You know, you've just reminded me that on October the 4th was the huge Women Wage Peace event. October the 5th was Praying Together in Jerusalem. First Thursday of the month we got together. It happened to be the festival of Sukkot, so we gathered in my synagogue's sukkah. Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists. We're on Zoom as well, so it's a hybrid gathering. And it was a wonderful celebration of Praying Together in Jerusalem. And we said at the end of that gathering, we'll see you in a month's time. And on October the 8th or 9th, Alon Goshen-Gottstein, the founder of the Elijah Interfaith Institute, and I was speaking, just checking up on each other and speaking. And we both said, we can't wait another month to pray together. We want to pray together every week. And the way Praying Together in Jerusalem works is we we study a topic together. We have speakers from Christianity, Judaism, Islam, whoever else might be part of it. We usually have 2 to 3 speakers, different religious groups, 6 different religions can be represented. So we come together, we learn something, and then we pray, and we don't do any mixed prayer. We do side-by-side prayer, authentically Jewish prayer, authentically Muslim prayer, authentically Christian prayer. And we said, what will our theme be? What will we talk about every week? And one of our participants is Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, who's chief conservative rabbi in the United Kingdom. And he had said to Alon the day before, I think he said, you know what's lost in a war? What's lost in a war is the dignity of the human person, both for the victims, of course, and the perpetrators of war. The dignity is under threat. So we made that our theme, the dignity of the human person. We had amazing teachings on that topic every week for weeks and weeks. We said we'll do this till the war ends, meet every week. We thought it would be a few weeks, of course. We did it for almost 2 years. Then we went back to monthly, and we meet on Zoom and in person. And it is quite incredible to see people's need to pray together and learn from each other. And although we didn't exhaust the topic of the dignity of the human person, that can never be exhausted, but we did exhaust in terms of our scholars. So we've moved back to the regular. We just had last week a Christmas Hanukkah special where we met and we lit an Advent candle before we lit the Hanukkah, and the 2 sets of candles are standing together. And that was simply called Stories That Inspire, and people from different religions shared stories that inspired them. So we do meet and we pray together and we learn together. But that theme that you mentioned about the human person, the dignity of the human person. And if you allow me to continue with my flow, because of that topic being so powerful, at our recent meeting of the Elijah Board of World Religious Leaders, we decided to continue along the same theme. We just came back from Oxford just 2 weeks ago, and we had religious leaders from 6 different religions, and our theme was the human person, religious ideals, and contemporary challenges. And to have cardinals and archbishops and chief rabbis and muftis and swamis and venerables sitting together in small groups discussing this topic was very powerful and very moving, and a privilege to be part of that group. I moderate the discussions.
That's so interesting, Peta, especially because in today's world that we're living in, religion is often not that, especially in this government in Israel. The government is so-called religious. I mean, there are 2 aspects. There are 2 different religious clans in the government. There's the Haredi clan, which is its own set of corruptions and patriarchy. And then you have the Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, Strzok clan, which is its own brand of racist, violent misogyny. And so these are not, and they all of them speak in the name of religion. You know, you listen to Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, and they're saying, they talk as if their views are the religious way. And the same thing with the Haredi, and here you are with a group that says, no, the religious path is something completely different.
Yes, I don't recognize my religion, my Judaism, in either of those groups. In fact, I become very angry. I will share with you a little incident in the supermarket the other day when I was returning an object, and one of the cashiers, who was a Muslim woman with a hijab, came up to the supervisor and said, "Do you mind if I take some time off or go out now?" And the supervisor said, "No." She said, "You don't look well. Your cheeks are red." And I said, "Yes, maybe you're not well." And as soon as she left, the supervisor turned to me and said, "May they all drop dead," or something along those lines. I was so horrified. Now, this supervisor dresses like a religious woman. So I said to her, "That's a very anti-Jewish statement you just made." And she looked at me in shock and surprise. She thought perhaps because I'm wearing a head covering that I would somehow empathize or sympathize with her horrible racist views. I nearly didn't say anything because it's a supermarket after all, but I felt I had to say something. I had to respond. And I looked at her very fiercely after saying that. And I hope that somehow deep inside she realized that's not my Judaism. That is something else. That is pure racism. It's not from our religious values at all.
See, you saying all these things as a religious practicing Orthodox Jew is very powerful. It has a special power to it, you know?
Well, I hope so, but I also would like to think that we can. I know other religious Orthodox activists for peace. The Elijah Interfaith Institute I mentioned, he's an Orthodox Jew. He founded this because he said that the motto is sharing wisdom, fostering peace. That we actually grow in our respect for each other. And we had one of our campaigns is called Make Friends, and we had Pope Francis spoke for it, the Dalai Lama spoke for it, the late Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs spoke for it. These great religious leaders saying, make friends with people from other faiths, because if we learn about each other and we share each other's wisdom, we realize, first of all, we gain a humility. We realize that we don't know everything. And I always go along with the midrash. I'm sure that many of your listeners and you are familiar with. There's a beautiful midrash, I called midrash rabbinic speculation. There's a beautiful midrash where God was creating the world and the angels were arguing with him, saying it's not a good idea to create human beings because human beings are dishonest and they're unjust and they're not going to be loyal followers of you. They've got their own mind. So it's 50-50 between the angels, all of whom have a particular characteristic in this particular midrash. So in it, God takes truth, who's saying, don't make human beings, they're not truthful, and throws him to the ground. Now, in doing that, he does two things. First of all, he breaks the deadlock. There's now a majority in favor of creating human beings. But
here we are.
Truth is shattered into little pieces. And the continuation of the midrash is, none of us has access to absolute or complete truth. We only have shattered pieces. And the more we can gather, the closer we are to understanding the divine will. So the more we talk to people from different religions who have access to different parts of truth, the richer we become in our understanding of the greater truth. And that's been my experience in the world of interfaith. When I entered it as a spokesperson for the Jewish community in Sydney, speaking to Christians initially and then to a broader group, speaking about my Judaism, making myself understood. But as I was more and more involved, I realized how much I grew from the interchange, not growing away from my Judaism, growing in my Judaism, from the wonderful learning that I did from people of other faiths. What they had to teach me established for me a deeper commitment to my own faith, but also for them to their faith. And that's something very beautiful.
It's so interesting what you're describing. It takes me back to what you said about what Leah Shaktiel said about how revenge doesn't work. You know, revenge.
It's not justice.
It's not justice because, you know, all of that, you know, to hang on to the need for revenge is, you know, in a certain way, you know, you're clinging to this thing that maybe it feels right on some level because you want to cling to your version of, you know, absolute truth kind of thing, but it stands in tension with the need for peace and for humanity and for connection. And it's true. I think it's a very valid observation that sometimes these things are in tension. Actually, I learned this like many, many years ago from Rabbi David Silber at Drisha in New York. He has this whole, I took, you know, this intense Gemara, I was in his program for about 6 months. And one of his main lessons in what we were studying in the Talmud was about the tension sometimes between shalom and emet, between peace and truth. And he said, you know, sometimes the justice system, like the courts, always have to like mediate, navigate between these two values and these two needs. You know, need for like, no, you know, truth, just, you know, truth, perfect justice versus peace versus like, okay, maybe like let go for a second of the need for that absolutism and replace it with, you know, a little more of that need for human connection and compassion, because the Jewish values of Ohev Shalom Ve'odev Shalom, love peace and pursue peace, Aaron, the original Aaron famously lied in order to bring couples back together for the sake of peace. And I mean, I'm not suggesting lying. I know I'm remembering what you said earlier about how we need truth, and truth is
but we need to understand that any truth we have will be partial by its very nature. But our job is to, exactly as you said, it's to pursue peace, to seek peace, and to seek truth, pursue truth. We may not reach either of them in absolute terms. In fact, maybe I'll share with you, I mentioned that praying together in Jerusalem was in Sukkot on the 5th of October 2023. And I learned on that gathering a very beautiful idea about the Sukkah. There's a lovely idea that the Sukkah is Sukkat Shalom. Sukkah and Shalom are always together, right? That the phrase, the Sukkat Shalom, the tabernacle of peace. But there's an inherent contradiction there, because the word Shalom means completion, complete, full, whole. Whereas the word Sukkah always refers to something which is partial and open. Your Sukkah has to have open sides. There has to be the ability to spaces. So how do Sukkah and Shalom go together? Well, that's precisely it. It is the idea that you seek the perfection, but you recognize that it's a little bit like that, the cracked bell, with the light, that you seek perfection, but you recognize you won't really have it. So peace is always going to be some form there's going to be a hole in it, but it doesn't matter. You still seek it, you still pursue it, while recognizing that it may not be or will not be absolute.
Any midrash that references Leonard Cohen is okay in my book.
I absolutely.
So this is really a really important. I mean, the work that you're doing here is, I don't want to say it's radical, because it really should not be radical. It's really humane, but it is sort of like almost out of tune with so much of what we expect from religion in today's world. So your message here about religion is very important. Like, what is your message about religion?
First, I start with the most basic. God creates human beings in his image. That's all human beings. It's not just us. And I think that, Ilana, one of the things I have to say here is, as an Orthodox Jewish feminist, I live with a certain dissonance all the time. And you mentioned this before, indeed, living with certain tensions. My religious life is not perfect, because I recognize, for example, and it's only an example, the issue of women and discrimination against women, and the failure of religion to provide an appropriate place for women to flourish in the religious world. And this is not, by the way, just Judaism, it's most religious establishments. So there's all that women versus the values. But God created us all in his image, male and female. That is a basic thing. What does God want from us? The prophets asked the question, and I believe God wants us to seek peace. God wants us to be compassionate. God wants us to look for what is good in this world. I pray every morning. I go to synagogue most mornings. I try to go there. And as I've become more involved in prayer, I've realized a couple of things. One of them is the wording of our Siddur, our prayer book, could lead to a form of triumphalism or, the superiority complex. I don't believe that's the intention at all. I believe it's a misinterpretation, but I see where children who are educated from the Siddur, from the prayer book, who are not given appropriate guidance and where it could go, and I feel like the Ben-Gvirs and Smotriches of this world were miseducated very badly, were not given the ability to discern what was meant where. And this is, and again, an awful lot of what was written in our prayer books was written outside the land of Israel, when we were genuinely a people wandering, a people waiting to return home, a people often oppressed. And one of the difficulties that we have in this country is coming to terms with the fact that we have power, we have autonomy, and we don't quite know what to do with that, because so much of our religion speaks about those who hate us and those who oppress us and those who want to do away with us. And it was written in a time when we were very vulnerable.
Yeah.
And
I always say in order to understand Ben Gvir,
Yes.
you have to go back to Brooklyn.
yes,
You know, Ben Gvir learned from Mayor
Yes.
Kahana, which is where I grew up. Mayor Kahana and I went to the same yeshiva in Brooklyn.
dear.
I mean, so I've had a real reckoning about this with myself because of exactly what you're describing. That everything that Ben Gvir talks about comes from the perspective of some kind of like really downtrodden, oppressed, and powerless Jew who has no way to do anything in some, diaspora community. Even though Brooklyn wasn't exactly like that. Jews in Brooklyn also had power, for the record. But I'm just saying that, like, it is very much that. Like, it really resonates what you're saying about that.
And
Like,
unfortunately, now that we've sort of taken up this direction, October the 7th, unfortunately, fed into that mindset. And we in the peace movement have had and continue to have to do a lot of work to bring people back to the recognition that our vulnerability there was our own fault. And I think that's one of the issues that I know that people in the Otef, the Gaza area, many of them have recognized and spoken very strongly about that. It wasn't just that Hamas is evil, and I say absolutely Hamas is evil. But there are evil people in all sorts of communities, in all sorts of places, and they don't necessarily get to perpetrate their evil. So there's that side of it as well. We unfortunately feeding into these fears. And Ilana, I might just mention, you mentioned I'm from Sydney. I might just mention that
I wanted to talk to you about Sydney for sure.
Similarly, I was in Australia speaking on behalf of Women Wage Peace just a few weeks ago, just before Rosh Hashanah. And I was horrified I was in Melbourne, Sydney and Canberra, and I was horrified at the changes I saw in Australia. I saw a country that had once been middle of the road, easygoing, extremely polarised. And I did see the anti-Semitism and I saw the fear of the Jewish community. But what happened in Bondi Beach and on the first night of Hanukkah, people said they'd been warning the government this is going to happen, that words lead to violence, that words are dangerous. The truth is, I don't think anybody really believed it was going to happen. And when it did happen, this community is also traumatized.
Sure.
I'm not going to say more or less than October 7th. We're not doing a numbers game here. Similarly, by the way, I will take this opportunity to say one of the worst things about this discourse and the conflict here is this competition about who's traumatized worse, who's been damaged worse, who's been oppressed worse. We mustn't use any of that language.
Yeah.
But the reality is the Australian Jewish community is at the moment traumatized.
Yeah, my husband's from Melbourne. I think and my husband's Australian, and we lived in Australia for a couple of years. They say the same thing. I mean, they were also saying for months and months that they felt like nobody was taking care of the Jewish community there, and also that they're not used to it. Like Australia, like not used to this at all. When there were protests on my mother-in-law's corner, she was in shock.
Yes.
Because like they're used to just sort of Australia being this very laid back, the lucky country.
Yes, there's been a radical change, and it's going to have to be dealt with if they want to recover the Australia that once was. I don't know if that's possible, but it's very concerning.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get back to what you were talking about before. So thank you for sharing that. I'm really glad that we just talked about that for a minute. And it's not a competition over pain. And, you can have empathy for all issues at the same time. You can have empathy for the people in Gaza and have empathy for the Jews of Australia who are all experiencing really horrible things. So let's go back to, you were talking about the reckoning that we as Jewish Israelis have to do about who we are. It's about our identity. It's about how to make that sort of collective transition from that diaspora mentality to the mentality of a military superpower. So how do you see the future here? Like, what would you like to see happen?
Well, I have grandchildren, as I mentioned to you, and I want my grandchildren to grow up in peace. That's tremendously important for me. And I often say I wouldn't have had children and certainly wouldn't have encouraged them to have children if I wasn't an optimist, if I didn't believe that the world could get better, or at least stay where we were, because I had the privilege of growing up in a very peaceful world. But I do believe we have to take responsibility as Israel for moving forward towards peace. And part of that will require, of course, a change of government, because although Women Wage Peace always said we will work with whomever is in power, we don't have a political alignment, we've realised that there's no one to talk to in this government. So we need to first worry about this coming elections and have an alternative. And then we need to take responsibility and recognise that what happened with Gaza and what has been happening in the north as well, we have to take control of the future, and we have to be the initiators of peace. But that doesn't mean imposing peace. I don't believe in unilateral, I don't think that's peace when there's a unilateral imposition of some settlement. I believe in a negotiated peace settlement. And again, that's the position of Women Wage Peace. And the negotiated peace settlement means that we need to find appropriate representatives of both the Palestinian and the Israeli community, including women. Should be 50% women. I'll settle for 40. But we have to have women. And again, UN Resolution 1325, which says that women make the likelihood of a sustainable peace much greater. So we need women and men from both the Palestinian and the Israeli leadership or positions of authority, those who can come together, and we need to go in there saying, you need peace, I need peace, you need justice, I need justice, you need autonomy and rights, human rights, you need all those things, I need them too. How are we going to get there together? How are we going to put some program together? I say Israel is always seen itself as the startup nation. We have to be a startup nation regarding a final picture of what this map looks like, this holy land, this place where we both live, Palestinians and Israelis, we live here together. We need to have a creative, wonderful, different solution. I'm not convinced that the nation state is going to be the model we come up with. We need something different, but we need both of us, all of us, to be able to live where we feel that this is really home and that we have our rights here and we have our futures here.
What's an alternative to the nation state?
Well, there are all sorts of models that are on the table, confederation of some sort, the land for all, the Alpha solution. But again, if I start to describe what I would like to see, I'm undermining my perspective on negotiations. So I don't want to paint a picture of what it needs to look like. I'd like to work that out with my partners.
You've spoken about the importance of feminist negotiation. Can you explain what that is?
A feminist negotiation is, as I've just described, you do not come in with a piece of paper saying, this is what I want, but I'm prepared to compromise on ABC. And the other side comes in, this is what I want, and I'm prepared to compromise on DEF. And every movement towards each other feels like a loss. It's a zero-sum game. That is the antithesis of a feminist approach. A feminist approach looks at the future, looks at the goal, looks at the end we want to get to, and works out together where and how we can get there.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. So you're a big believer in women's. I mean, you've been a feminist activist for decades.
Yes, I think that's fair to say. I would give credit to my mother, who grew up in an environment where she was denied a lot of self-development and self-fulfillment as a girl and then as a woman. She only went to university along with the fifth member of our family. I'm the eldest of 5 children. She didn't go to university till after 2 or 3 of us already had degrees, but she was determined to do it, and she said, being a woman should not have been something that held me back, and it shouldn't hold you back.
Oh, that's fantastic. What was your mother's name?
Geraldine Kiverstein. And you might remember the Kiverstein Institute, which for 5 years we promoted women's empowerment and the amplification of women's voices in Jerusalem. And I'm proud to say that we actually had some achievements of more women on the local administrations as a result of that work. And some of our networks that we founded continue.
Fantastic. You are so active. You are so busy with so many things. So just a last question before we have to wrap up here. What's next for you or us?
For us, yes. Well, I imagine that I continue my work with Women Wage Peace. When we ran this program for women, for religion as an instrument of peace, my co-moderator, Raifa, and myself, we said, we'll do this as a volunteer work. It was a lot of work and required a lot of professional input. And I said, but I have a condition. My condition is we don't only do it once. We have to do it again. And we will do it again. Women Wage Peace will run another similar group to bring together women of different religions. Even though I've tried to retire from the Elijah Interfaith Institute several times, they're not letting me retire. I imagine continuing to work to bring more women onto the board of world religious leaders, because that's one of the institutional problems of women in religious leadership. It's simply not enough of us, and there's a certain glass ceilings that still need to be shattered. So I don't imagine stopping. And if there's an opportunity to amplify women's voices, and if there's an opportunity to turn religion into an instrument of peace, I'll be there trying to do it.
Wow, that sounds lovely. Peta Pellach, the one and only. Thank you so much for being here with us today at our Women Ending War podcast. It was so great to talk to you.
Thanks so much,
And
Alana.
best wishes to all your family in Sydney.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
It's great.
Thanks for listening to Women Ending War. If you want to help create change, you should join us.
Subscribe, like, comment, or share. Tell your friends about us. Talk about it. Be part of the solution.
Thanks, and see you next time.